every one of these media days has their own main topic. Like, what's the meta of these media days? And for the SEC, we know it's going to be conference games, the additions of Texas and Oklahoma, conference expansion. The Big 12 was also about conference expansion, but there's a little bit of beef between the SEC and the Big 12. And their commissioner went ahead and spoke to some of those issues over the week.
In those moments where you're not sure, you pick up the phone and you gain clarity. And Greg said that it was, taken out of context. Now, does he agree with my approach? Maybe not. But, every conference is in a different situation. And every conference requires different skill sets. And, I'm not going to apologize for anything I did or said. And I believe in that transparency. And I believe in being very intentional and not doing something at night or the shock and awe approach. And he and I had a great conversation, and we are very friendly. I like Greg a lot. He's been a sounding board for me amongst the A5 commissioners. Obviously, he's got a lot of institutional knowledge. But in those moments where you're not sure,
you pick up the phone.
And you don't let anything fester. And that's what I did.
And the only thing missing there from Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark was I looked him in the eye and we had a conversation as men.
Yeah, it was the pandemic when John Swafford first told us, we talk every day. And then the next year we get we have an alliance. It's a bond. It can't be broken. We don't need a contract.
So to that end, as we just gave you two examples of conference commissioners,
that was Jim Phillips, the second one.
Not two instances of conference commissioners not following through on their word. Why would anybody take anything that Greg Sankey says at face value at this point? If you're a conference commissioner, this is the same conference that Trojan horsed the college football playoff expansion so that they could bring in Texas and Oklahoma. All right. You brought up the pandemic when everybody should have been on the same page. What did the SEC decide to do? Now, the ACC was right in that they hitched their wagon to the SEC about we're playing football games. But again, the SEC is going to do whatever the hell the SEC feels like doing.
Every conference is going to do what they believe is best for them.
Yes.
Because there's probably a Big East fan out there going, now, wait a second. The ACC is the one that originally rated the Big East. And they did. Mm-hmm. So every conference is going to make decisions based on what they believe is best for them. That's kind of sort of the problem with college sports is there. Yes, the NCAA exists, but there's no central authority. There's no figure that looks out for, quote unquote, like we see in baseball, the best interests of the game. We don't have that in college sports. And that's a problem.
It is.
And Mike Krzyzewski's talked about this forever, how men's basketball, women's basketball, and football should all have their own commissioners. They should all have people who are looking out for what is in the best interest of those individual conferences. You mentioned this, that Disney is running out of money. Ultimately, what this is all about is TV rights.
Yes.
And who wants to pay for them. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The Big Ten has figured out a way to piecemeal this from all different sources, not named ESPN.
Mm-hmm.
And then ESPN basically owns all of the other conferences.
Mm-hmm.
So it is in zero interest. Because I'm thinking of this. If you would have told me right now, I'll give you $1 million to name who the commissioner of the Big 12 is, I would have said Bob Bowlesby. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know, or maybe even Chuck Ninus, but like,
Chuck Ninus.
Right? Like
going old school.
Yeah.
There.
I'm just saying, like, I don't know, so that's a problem for some. Maybe you say it's a Joe problem that I don't know who the commissioner of the Big 12 is.
I don't think it's
I literally didn't even know the Big 12 still existed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And they still have Oklahoma and Texas
for now,
but they exist. Did they re-up with ESPN? Not yet, or they have?
I think they have. It's weird. Like the Pac-12's TV deal. The Pac-12's TV deal has not come through. It's been
the
like
Pac-12 is probably going to end up on Apple or something crazy. They're going to do something stupid.
It probably will.
And I say stupid because when people can't find you regularly, it becomes an issue. You're asking your audience to find you, which is difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Big 12 to me is a conference that what people don't realize in the ACC is closer to the Big 12 than they are the other conferences.
Real quick. Big 12 did sign a $2.3 billion media rights deal with ESPN,
with
Fox Sports and Fox Sports.
Okay.
Back in October of 22.
So what's important for ESPN is they still need inventory.
Mm-hmm.
They're not, while they have an SEC network and will show replays of games and will show like SEC biographies, the live games are still the inventory that these channels need. So it is in ESPN's best interest to have a healthy Big 12 because they've invested in it, not at the same level or years as the ACC, but it is in ESPN's best interest for the ACC to be healthy. So this is where people get confused. ESPN also now owns the SEC. They're not going to take Clemson and North Carolina out of the ACC, a conference that they owe money to, and it is in their best interest to, and move them to the SEC and be like, oh, okay, here you go, because we own this one too.
Well, let me ask you this.
The danger there is Fox, Big Ten, at CBS, NBC coming in and saying, hey, we really want Carolina. We really want Clemson. That's the danger.
That is a danger, and one that'll probably pop back up again when we get closer to 2030 and the ACC's ESPN deal starts to run out.
You and I are on the same page. 28 is when maybe you start some of those overtures.
Let me ask you this.
It's 23 as we speak.
What do you think is more valuable to ESPN right now? Changing the teams within a conference to create these kinds of matchups, or adding a 9th conference game in the SEC? What's more valuable to the SEC?
They screwed up. ESPN. When I say they screwed up. They didn't put it in their contract.
Didn't put it in the contract.
Yeah. Ultimately, they'll have to pay more for it.
Yes,
because the schools are going to draw a line in the sand and say, "No,
well, they already have." No, they already have. Let's not mistake what the SEC was talking about this spring during their meetings when they decided to stay at 8 games. That 9th conference game is the last bargaining chip they have with ESPN to get more money out of them, and it's going to give them more money per year to add a 9th conference game and create more Texas, Alabama, Oklahoma, Georgia matchups than it would to bring in Clemson or Florida State. That's where their value is. Greg Sankey seems set with the brands that they have right now, and they know by dangling that 9th conference game, that's where they get the money, which gets back to what you said in reference to ESPN and where they are as a company right now. And this is why I think major conference realignment is dead. It is dead right now because none of these networks have the money anymore. There's a big, huge reset of the table taking place in the industry. And Disney's feeling it to the point where Bob Iger, who came back to be the CEO of Disney, recently had like a 30-minute conversation with CNBC. And in that conversation, he basically put all of their television on the block to sell if need be. Like, they were willing to part ways with ABC, even though I think that's a little bit too much of a stretch because they have relationships with the NBA, et cetera, right? But he openly talked about a partner, selling a stake of ESPN. That would be unheard of 10 years ago, where ESPN,
FanDuel,
which was that's exactly who it is. It's not just FanDuel, it's also Fanatics. It's Fanatics.
Well, that guy,
right? That dude's got
what on earth?
Tons of money.
You saw the birthday party, right?
Oh yeah, it's crazy. So he could buy a stake in ESPN and sell all the merch and do the gambling stuff as well, because Fanatics is getting into that market as well.
They're in the baseball card market.
Yeah, they are.
Or they're about to.
They are. So somebody has to pay for it. And when you look at the industry right now, there's not a lot of
somebody has to pay for it, and you have a whole generation that says, I don't love paying for things, guys.
And you have another generation, that's talking about how they're not all that interested in sports to begin with.
Yeah, it's a double whammy.
So you got all sorts of outside factors pressuring these entities, and they're being much more judicious on how they're going to spend their money. And just bringing in Clemson, Florida State, or whoever is not going to be incentive enough to rework that deal. And to your point about ESPN and the ACC, it's in their best interest to keep at a bargain deal that conference intact, which, as we talked about on Friday's overtime edition of the podcast, the ACC will be fine in 2027 when ESPN becomes the primary partner, and they're going to get a substantial financial bump that dies with the Raycom deal dying.
Oh, yeah.
So when the Raycom deal ends,
$3 million per school.
So, but my understanding is that, like most things ACC, it's been sandbagged, and there's a lot more money coming in terms of an average annual value coming to the ACC starting in 2027 through the end of the contract in 2035. But if you've been paying attention to what's going on at ESPN, if you've been paying attention to what's been going on at the SEC and how they've talked about conference games, it's fantasy talk. Most of college realignment stuff is fantasy talk anyway.
It's fan fiction.
It's fun stuff to do in the summertime. But
West Virginia guy,
of course, where's my guy Greg Swain these days, right? That's a callback. But for the most part, I am more and more convinced that major college realignment is dead. at this point. And even when we get closer to 2035, we can't predict what the television landscape is going to look like. It might not be in Fox's best interest to blow everything up and come up with yet another bunch of money to bring in another school, because it's not just about feeding another mouth.
Yeah, you also don't know what's going to happen with football.
You don't.